Very grateful to have this opportunity to talk about William Sloane Coffin and his legacy, his witness. He is certainly a great soul. He is a person, you'll see this later on in the presentation, about whom Fred Craddock said that when Bill Coffin prepared, he was the greatest preacher in America. Best preacher in the country is the exact words that Fred Craddock used. So if Fred Craddock says that, that's pretty significant. At any rate, we're dealing with a person, as I said earlier, as we were prepping, who's most appropriate to focus upon on this Peace Sunday in many Disciples of Christ congregations and many Protestant congregations across the United States. The second Sunday of Advent finds many churches lighting the peace candle on the Advent wreath, and there could be maybe no better proponent for peace and peacemaking than William Sloane Coffin. William Sloane Coffin was branded as a very big, progressive, evangelical liberal, you could say. He had an evangelical spirit with a little e, but in his 81 years, his impact was immense not only across the country, but around the world. This is him in his beautiful multicolored vest with a robe that was given to him when he retired from Riverside Church and went to work for Nuclear Freeze SANE. He was the executive director of that after that pastorate at the church in New York. At any rate, let's go to the next slide. We'll do a little bit of a timeline. We have the full range of somebody who is very active all of his life, and that's pretty rare for a great soul. You remember that Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated when he was 39 years old. Joan of Arc wasn't even basically out of young adulthood. We have in Coffin, though, somebody who lived a full range of experiences, victories, defeats, transformations, changes, and the like. So Coffin was of the manor born, as we might say. And his father was a furniture executive. His mother was of gentry class, if you will. But his father died when he was 8 years old, and his mother moved the family to Carmel, California, with some assistance from Henry Sloane Coffin. His uncle was the president of Union Seminary. We'll see him in just a moment. He was a pianist to begin with. I'm not sure everybody knows this. He was trained and destined to be a concert pianist. They moved to Paris and he studied with Nadia Boulanger. He would then go to a series he was slated to go to a series of just what rich, wealthy, landed gentry people did, which was go to one of the top prep schools in the country, Phillips. But a little thing called World War II interrupted his journey, and he enlisted in the Army in 43 and served all the way to 47. The tail end of World War II, remember, this young man is not even, about 22, 23 years old. He was very good with languages, facile in French, but he learned Russian very, very easily. And he began to be a translator and worked with the kind of the repatriation, if you will, of captured Russians that were in Germany and then being sent back to Moscow or sent back to certain parts of Russia. He recounts in his memoir, Once to Every Man and Nation, a harrowing moment when he knew, because of Stalin, he knew that he was sending some Russian troops to their certain deaths back in their mother country. And such was state of the Cold War. Such was the state of the tensions between the West and the East. And that made a huge impression on him his whole life long. He would get out of the Army and go back, and he did 1 year at Union Seminary, worked at a church in Harlem. Then, though, he transferred over to Yale University, where he would graduate with his undergraduate degree. He went back into the service of his country through the CIA. A lot of people don't know this. He worked for the CIA for 4 years on Russian affairs. And in '56, when he finally got out of Yale Divinity School, he I'm messing up the timeline a little bit. After the CIA, he went to Union Seminary for a year, then transferred over to Yale, from which he graduated. He was ordained a Presbyterian minister. He married Eva Rubinstein, who was the daughter of Arthur Rubinstein, the great classical pianist, and they began a family. He was chaplain for a while at Phillips Academy, then Williams College, but then in '58, he got a position eventually around which he would become very famous. He was the chaplain at Yale University. He was an activist chaplain. We have here in Kansas City a person who used to babysit his children at Yale. And my friend Michael Brecky went to Yale and got to know Bill Coffin very, very well and babysat his children there in New Haven. In '61, he would be one of 11 freedom riders who ventured to Montgomery, Alabama to protest the segregation via Jim Crow in Montgomery and also across the South and everywhere else. In '65, he has paid attention to the ravages of the Vietnam War, and with John Bennett from Union Seminary and Abraham Joshua Heschel from the Jewish Theological Seminary, he forms a thing called Clergy and Laity Concerned About Vietnam. It was called CALC. Usually that was the shorthand. He would preach in Battelle Chapel to packed houses, if you will, on Sunday mornings. He was a great preacher. He would resign from the chaplaincy after a good long tenure, almost 18 years, and 17 years rather. And he would take a year off to travel the country and to write his memoir, which I've already mentioned, Once to Every Man a Nation. In '77, Riverside Church was kind of at a turning point, and they did not know which way to go. They were on Upper West Side toward Harlem. They did not have a lively witness or presence in the Harlem community, and there was some tension there. But William Sloane Coffin was seen as somebody who could not only hold the congregation together, but motivate it, charge it up, move it forward, and he did. And he would relate the pulpit and the messages he was preaching always with the issues of the day, both not only in New York City, but across the country. He was one of the few people that visited, by the way, back in the early '70s when he was a chaplain, the prisoners in Hanoi. He later in 1980, he would visit 79 rather at Christmas. He was visiting hostages in Tehran. In January 17th, in 1983, maybe the biggest sorrow of his life occurred. And I'll try to read the opening lines of this sermon. The sermon was just called Alex's Death. And it was his son that drove off of a pier in the Boston Harbor and drowned. He dealt with that. It's probably his most famous sermon, the one most requested. You can find it online in many places. And if not, I can get it for you and make a PDF of it and send it to you. 84, he marries for the third time, Randy Wilson. In 87, he will retire from Riverside and begin to head up nuclear freeze movement called SANE as well. He lectures widely on social justice issues all across the country from 88 to 93. And he even came here, Brent will remember, for the Disciples Peace Fellowship and preached out of Overland Park Christian Church for one of our, I think, Peace Sundays, actually, several years ago here in our region. In 1999, he suffered a stroke, but he did very nobly thereafter. And he had a great line that I'll share with you in just a moment, that he almost always would introduce his stroke-affected speech in whatever presentation he was doing, whether it would be at Chautauqua or at a local congregation or at a university. He was very, very loquacious and humble and very, very persuasive. He spoke here, I think the last time he was in Kansas City was for the Center for Practical Bioethics. He and Harold Kushner of When Bad Things Happen to Good People fame came together and spoke about end-of-life care and dealing with death, and also how best for congregations to engage in the provision of care at the end of life. He would die peacefully at his home in Stratford, Vermont, which is where his remains were buried, and not far from a church that he played organ in quite a bit. Remember, he was a classically trained pianist, but he also would learn how to play the organ. These are some of the pictures that show his much celebrated and celebrity-riddled life. In the upper left-hand corner is his father. Those two pictures, a photograph and a portrait, that's William Sloane Coffin Sr. And then right next to him is Henry Sloane Coffin, his brother, and William Sloane Coffin Jr.'s uncle, who provided financially after his father died. I couldn't believe this, but I found this photograph of him and Eva Rubinstein being married. That's on their wedding day on the far left in the middle. He had a kind of jocular, bon vivant attitude and presence. Even he's smiling there as they're getting off the bus in Montgomery, Alabama, as part of the Freedom Rider entourage. There he is after he was busted, if you will, arrested for illegally breaking the laws against integration there in Alabama. At the bottom picture, he's greeting people in Hanoi, the soldiers that were there. He was with Dr. King and hosted Dr. King, not hosted him as the pastor, but was with him when Dr. King declared his opposition to the Vietnam War on April the 4th, 1967, 1 year to the day exactly before he was shot in Memphis. That declaration about the Vietnam War was held at Riverside Church, coincidentally. In the bottom picture is Arthur Miller of Death of a Salesman fame, The Crucible and all the rest, great dramatist and friend of Coffin's. To the right of that is Dr. King's widow, Coretta Scott King. And on the far right is Abraham Joshua Heschel. Coffin and Heschel would spend Shabbat together during the high holy days, like either Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. They would frequently spend those high holidays together, and he would call him Father Abraham, and do theological wrestling with one of the greatest minds who ever walked upon America's soil, and also whoever expressed a notion or a thought or an idea about God anywhere. The pictures on the far right are him in his older age, right after being at Riverside, and then showing his humor and his jocularity, and then showing him at the piano. I'm sorry, that he did play the organ too at this church, but this picture is a picture at the piano at the Stratford Church in Vermont. And you'll notice that he doesn't have much pretense about him. He doesn't mind you taking a picture of him with his shorts on at the piano. So next slide. I want to make something very clear about Bill Coffin. He was an institutionalist, meaning he believed in the institutions to which he was connected. He was an institutionalist, and he was grounded at Yale, both undergraduate and then his graduate school. He was a member of the Skull and Bones Club, which is a secret society there, you know, kind of the hoi polloi, and there's 3 different secret societies that kind of include people who will be the makers and the shakers of society. He was in the Army twice, remember, or served his country twice, a long time in the Army from 43 to 47, but then he serves the CIA from 53 to 58, is that right? I think it is. So he's in service to his country and an institutionalist in a huge way. Battelle Chapel on the far left, on the middle and the lower left, those are, that's where he held forth and preached for some 17 years. The scene from the balcony is probably the way it looked when he was preaching there every Sunday, or hosting guest preachers, and he would have the best from everywhere. Then the picture in the middle with him in the vaulted pulpit is Riverside Church. That's him kneeling at a prayer rail, and also the Riverside Church Carillon Tower. A great story about him and Fred Craddock. He had Craddock come up and preach for him one time, and he had him, Coffin lived very humbly as a bachelor at that time, and he had him stay in his apartment, which didn't have much going for it. And he said, by the way, I don't have much food. Go over to the church and they'll serve you breakfast over there. And so Craddock got over there prior to preaching, you know, in the great, great Riverside Church. And he asked where the breakfast might be served, and they directed him to where it was, and it was where all the homeless people were. And that's where Coffin would eat breakfast. And all the homeless people were lined up, and Craddock got in line too and got his breakfast, and would later tell the story about how his expectations were upset by his noble brother, Bill Coffin. In the lower right hand, we have the nuclear freeze symbol, sane freeze that he worked for, believing that nuclear weapons were a sure sign of our country's sinfulness, if you will. The legacy that he's left has created something, the Peace Action for New York State. I think it's Peace Action New York State Committee. They have a New York State Committee. They have a special award named the William Sloane Coffin Jr. Peacemaker Award, and they gave out 2 last year. And these are pictures of him in his maturity with his wife, Randy, and their English bulldog there. I think that's an English bulldog. And then him naturally relaxed, showing what kind of a good, fulfilling, and fulfilled senior status really looks like. We should ask, what or who made William Sloane Coffin? And I kind of put these kind of contrasts together. He was of the manner born, but he loved all people where they were. Remember the story I just told about him eating breakfast with homeless people at Riverside. He trained as a concert pianist, but he also volunteered for service as a soldier of one sort or another in 2 wars. He worked for the CIA on Russian affairs and sat at the feet of the world's greatest theologians. He served as chaplain at Yale University, but also expressed extraordinary preaching at Riverside Church. He galvanized awareness of the civil rights struggle, being one of those 11 freedom riders who ventured to Montgomery, Alabama. And he wrote and mused and prayed in his final home in rural Vermont. He loved to celebrate at every turn with a bon vivant spirit, as I've already said. But he also worked hard on his sermons, his prayers, and all other public presentations. I can't go any further without commenting on his masterful use of language. He possessed an extraordinary capacity, consistently expressed, to share his compassionate, caring heart on real terms and in real time, with a sure grasp of the grand nature of faith and faith's connection with the great issues of the days. His prayers, his sermons, almost anything he ever spoke about always had sighs. He was pastorally sensitive and prophetically passionate in his language. He could soar to great poetic heights, but also would reference specific events of the day. And one thing about prayer, he said, you don't just say to God, oh, Lord, you know my pain. You say, Lord, do you feel the pain in my right knee? Specificity. That's what we need in all of our language events. He possessed a genius use of parallelisms and powerful images. Next slide. Here are a few, just a few of his memorable quotes. Unless we become weak, there will be no one left to inherit the earth. Human unity is based not on agreement, but on mutual concern. Never mind how crude or how trivial your prayers may sound to you, there are no unimportant tears to God. And he said, I love this one. We are always called to love the good more than we hate the evil, lest we only become damn good haters. And there's too much dignity in too many prayers, dignity at the expense of specificity, as I've already said. And prayer is praying, Our Father who art in heaven, when everything within us longs to cry out, my Father, because our includes that horrible divorced husband, that wayward child. It includes muggers, rapists, the Iranian captors, all the people who jam thorns into our flesh. I want to go back to this love the good moment. Keep it there and there. This is one of Coffin's great gifts. He always loved the good more than he hated the evil. He would point out the evil, and he'd talk about passionately how not only he hated it, but how you should hate it too. But he always loved the good more. And it comes out again and again in his sermons, in his actions, in the alliances and coalitions he builds with other people, in the good that he tries to do. He always loves the good more than just hating the evil. So where do we start? It is pretty rare, and I would urge your library to buy both of the books on the far left, the Collected Sermons of William Sloane Coffin 1 and also Volume 2. These are of his time at Riverside Church, and they are extraordinary. It has, both of these volumes have this introduction by Martin Marty. It's a very lengthy, probably 3,000 word introduction to Coffin, examining the sermons, describing his life, describing his use of extraordinary homiletical gifts, and it would be worthy. I'm not embarrassed, but the publisher should be embarrassed that they used a flipped photograph on the far left of the photograph that was really rightly positioned or shown in the book on the far right, which is a biography by Warren Goldstein that has no parallel in literature right now. I mean, it is the best biography of Coffin that you can find. I don't even know of anybody who's trying to write one. It'll be a long while before anybody writes this. Somebody will write a book eventually about his relationship with Abraham Joshua Heschel, and that will be a worthy book to purchase. His memoir, Once to Every Man a Nation, goes up to the time that he retired or resigned from Yale University chaplaincy, but it doesn't include the Riverside years or his senior status and when he became one of the wise elders of our country. These are his books that he wrote in addition to the memoir, starting his very first book, The Courage to Love. Then came Living the Truth in a World of Illusions. Then came A Passion for the Possible. And then The Heart is a Little to the Left on public morality. His most popular volume, which is Credo, is there situated next to the last on the right, and then Letters to a Young Doubter. The book on the far lower left corner, Prayers from Riverside, is a wonderful book. You have to get it on ABE Books, and because it's no longer in print, I don't think. It may be, maybe it may have been picked up, but Leo Thorne, who used to be at First Baptist Church on Red Bridge, before he was there, right here in our own town, in the greater Kansas City area, was on the staff at Riverside when Coffin was there. And he puts together prayers from Harry Emerson Fosdick, which was one of the predecessors of Coffin's at Riverside Church, Robert McCracken as well, and William Sloane Coffin. They're a collection of prayers, and you see in it his use, and you can hear his use of very, very kind of high church language. He addresses God as thee. He uses thee and thou and thine language, very old school, but very, very, very powerful. These are some of the audio-visual resources that you could check out. I've checked the ones that I think would be most engaging and most readily accessible for you. The Religion and News Weekly, Ethics News Weekly is very brief, 9 minutes and 29 seconds, and very, very well done. It's a tribute to Coffin, and this is before he passes. So, but also after he had had a stroke. There is a long, over 2-hour kind of symposium, it's a symposium about Coffin, and he speaks in the middle of it, and that's where the politically engaged spirituality piece comes from. So 22 minutes of that 2 hours and 6 minutes is Coffin. So if you get the Yale Divinity School Public Witness and Ministry of William Sloane Coffin, you're going to get both of those pieces in one. And then some shorter ones, one that's not even 20 seconds that Craddock enunciates. And I've given the marker in a longer treatment that he gives about his favorite preachers. There's a thing called the William Sloane Coffin Archive Project that his son, David, has put together. And these are sermons that you can get on, I think, dare I say, cassette tapes. Maybe they've moved on to CDs. I don't think that they are available via MP3 player. I don't think that you can download from the internet. I may be wrong about that. There is a wonderful sermon, audio sermon called Preach from the Piano Bench, and it's of Coffin waxing theological and poetic as he preaches about music and plays both the piano and the organ and leads the congregation at Riverside in singing. And it is remarkable. It was from him that I learned that Joy to the World, for example, was a Palm Sunday hymn before it was a Christmas song. And also that the music parallels the theology in the song. So it's God coming down from on high. Joy to the world, the Lord has come. You see, from on high to earth's realm, we see the arrival of this great, great one that we proclaim as Christ, and that was such a great hymn that the Christmas people stole it and put it over on Christmas Corner with all the other great music of the church. These are two videos that I don't know where you'd get them. They're both VHS, and I couldn't find any evidence that they've been made into CDs so that you could get them. Maybe the one on the left you could get on Amazon. But these are very interesting treatments of Coffin as a prophet. And the one on the right is kind of a tribute to him and also a remembrance of the class of 1968. Remember how tumultuous that was in American history, of his time at Yale. from the graduating class at Yale. Yes, we're going to go to the video clips, and let me describe this to us. The first clip is Coffin in his New York accented best, where he's full of charm, wit, but you can also hear this growling New York accent. And he preached pretty much as he talked, only louder, almost always louder. And this is prior to his stroke. I think this is in 1985 or 86.
Well, when I was a seminarian, I worked in East Harlem, and I ran into a gambler. And I tried to talk him out of his chosen vocation. And he listened, I must say, very patiently. And then he says, "You're going to be a preacher someday, son, aren't you?" And I said, "That's right. Why?" And he said, "So you believe in grace, right?" And I said the same thing. "Yes, why?" So I'll tell you why. You believe in grace and I believe in gambling. That means both of us believe life is good when it's something for nothing. I was mightily impressed. All I could do was sort of salute, and walk off and ponder his wisdom. But it is something for nothing. I mean, what did any of us do to deserve the air which is still fresh despite New York's pollution? What did we ever do to deserve a sky that's blue, a sun that's bright yellow, and all the something for nothings that are there? And then the fact that heaven, I've always felt, is affirmed in the depth of hell, so that when you're in the midst of the most intense kind of personal suffering, you're not abandoned. God provides minimum protection, maximum support.
One of my favorite lines: God provides minimum protection, but maximum support. Good line for parents, I think. The next quote, the next piece is a kind of a tribute piece to him in his increased old age. And this is after he has suffered a stroke. You'll see him receiving a medal, the Union Medal from Union Theological Seminary in New York City. But then you'll hear him from his home in Stratford, Vermont, as he opines and talks about a lover's quarrel with America.
Joy is not the same as happiness. Joy is some kind of fulfillment, that somehow we're in the right fight. That's a source of great pleasure. Now, people in the wrong fight, as I see it, also think they're in the right fight. But it's gives you a sense of undeserved integrity to be in the middle of the right fight. When the day goes hard and cowards steal from the field, it's important that we find a place where the fighting is fiercest. We have major responsibility to be faithful to God. Faith is a matter of being faithful. And faithful Jews, faithful Muslims, faithful Christians have a lot in common. And together, we could actually save the world.
I want to say something about how Coffin dealt with the stroke. Here in Kansas City, I heard him say it. I've heard it. You can find it on many, many video clips. There's a great sermon he preached can't remember where this one was, but he's preaching in a very beautiful colored robe, and he I think it's at Chautauqua, and he cites Mark Twain in that instance as well. He had a great charm and humility, but disarming welcome to you when he spoke after he had his stroke. He said something to this effect. He said, "I'm grateful to Mark Twain and what he said when I think about the stroke and how it has affected my language, which is my speech, which you can tell. But I take great comfort in what Mark Twain said about Wagner's music. It really is better than it sounds." And he would crack the crowd up with that and then move on. But it was always a great rhetorical turn to get people at ease with the sound of his stroke affected speech. He was ever so gracious, exceedingly well read. Again and again and again, he would impress people with his intelligence and engage them at whatever level they were to think more, to love more. One of the great things he said was Descartes had it wrong. Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." Cogito ergo sum in the Latin at that time. "I think, therefore I am." He says, no. Amo ergo sum. "I love, therefore I am." And that was, he didn't steal that from anybody. He wasn't being a magpie. That was him appropriating one of the great philosophical treatises of all time and saying, no, from a faith perspective, we love, therefore we know we exist. So a couple of estimations of him that are on the next slide are very, very powerful. Warren Goldstein in his biography says that Coffin's preaching remained relevant and inspiring for 40 years because, like the biblical prophets, he never allowed his enemies, racism, war, nuclear weapons, hunger, homophobia, or anything, as much power as he ascribed to the love of God. Again, loving the good more than he hated the evil. By taking his God seriously and preaching Christianity joyously, William Sloane Coffin Jr. helped create a holy impatience with injustice that will live long beyond his own life. And then Fred Craddock, as I've already cited, but I'll share the full quote here. "When Bill Coffin prepared, he was the best preacher in this country. The simple mixing of an evangelical message of God's love with, let's get out there and get it done. He was just extraordinary." I put this picture at the end. This is a picture of Coffin at that piano bench in Stratford, Vermont, because he's tilted his head toward us. But if he was looking straight ahead, he would be looking toward the horizon to the right, huh? He would always be looking forward. But with a kind of impish grin, he looks over and acknowledges us, the camera person who was taking his shot then. And in all of his New York glory there, even though he lives in Stratford, Vermont, he's kind of telling us, let's get out there and get it done. So time's yours, as Andy Reid says. And if people can switch on their cameras again so that we can see their faces somehow, some way. I'd be curious, how many of you even knew who William Sloane Coffin was before today?
I didn't.
I did.
I did to a point anyway.
Good.
Can't get my-
How many of you knew that he worked for the CIA?
No.
Very few people know
I
about
didn't know
this.
that.
Very few people knew that he did that or that he served so faithfully. Very young. Remember, I think he's 19 when he goes into the Army in 43, and he doesn't come out until 47. So he's 23, 24 years old. He's translating for the Russians. I mean, using his great, extraordinary talent with languages. Obviously brilliant and bright,
Didn't write it.
and also being shaped by those foundational moments.
Well, he certainly is a well-rounded person with interests and expertise and, experience in so many. I mean, how many people know Russian?
Very few, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and you put all that together, and I guess that either contributed to or sprang out of his use of language and being able to put that all together. Yeah.
I don't do this every time, but I got it out just because in kind of honoring William Sloane Coffin, I have the Bible here on my desk or the table where I've set up the computer in our living room in the new condo. And I wanted to have it there because of Karl Barth. And I'm not a Barthian theologian by any stretch of the imagination, but I love what Barth said, that you must live your faith with the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other, that we must relate the biblical witness to the issues of our day. In as much as people don't buy newspapers much these days, I don't know whether we should have a phone in one hand and a Bible in the other.
Yes,
but
that's it.
we
Yes,
should
caustic.
we should relate the two. It was either Merv Griffin or a Jerry Falwell show where he was on the stage with the host, with Jerry Falwell, and they were talking about issues of the day. And Jerry Falwell was out for blood. He wanted to try to humiliate and shame Coffin of being an unbiblical preacher and a heretic. And so Jerry Falwell, they began to talk, and I don't know what it was about, whether it was about the war or it was about abortion or it was about women's rights or whatever it was, civil rights. But Jerry Falwell kept interrupting and says, "Where's your Bible? Where's your Bible? Where's your Bible?" And Coffin, without missing a beat, he says, "I just came assuming I'd read from yours."
Oh, amen to that.
And Jerry Falwell had not brought one.
Uh-huh.
So Coffin was no fool, and he could hold his own with
I love
anybody. I can't remember. No, I'm sorry. The Temple was the name of the book. This is W.E. Orchard, William E. Orchard. And he said that phrase that Coffin quoted and lived as a mantra. He didn't do the whole thing. I'll try to do the whole thing now. When the day goes hard and cowards steal from the field, grant that our place will be there where the fighting is fiercest. When I was talking with Coffin one time and we were kind of trading quotes back and forth, and I said, where the fighting is the fiercest, he immediately corrected me. He says, no, there's no thee there, just where fighting is fiercest. He knew it so particularly. He knew it so specifically. When the day goes hard and cowards steal from the field, grant that our place will be found there where the fighting is fiercest. It almost sounds like the Shakespearean St. Crispin's Day speech, you know. He had a little bit of iambic pentameter in him. Coffin did. So
My God. Probably
Go ahead, Susan.
I just to say probably that musical background didn't hurt anyway of
exactly.
pentameter business anyway.
Exactly. He knew scansion and beat and emphasis. Absolutely. Yep. He worked hard on his sermons, by the way. He would go over and over. And, you know, if you saw one of his manuscripts, he was almost editing right up to the end.
Oh.
And the sermon that he preaches on his son Alex's death, he was, you know, his son died, I think it's less than a week. He appeared back maybe less than 10 days, he appeared back in the Riverside pulpit. You'd think if you lost a son, you'd take a month, take 2 months, take as much time as you want. But the way that he needed to work it out was in the pulpit. Let me see if I can get that. I want to read a little bit from that, if you don't mind, Brent.
Yeah,
I
I
can
put it
find
in
it real
chat.
quick.
I put it in chat.
but I want to read a little bit of it because it is so, so powerful. Yeah, here it is. I want to read the opening line of this. Listen to this. As almost all of you know, a week ago last Monday night, driving in a terrible storm, my son, Alexander, who to his friends was a real day brightener, and to his family fair as a star when only one is shining in the sky. My 24-year-old Alexander, who enjoyed beating his old man at every game and in every race, beat his father to the grave. Among the healing flood of letters that followed his death was one carrying this wonderful quote from the end of Hemingway's A Farewell to Arms. The world breaks everyone, then some become strong at the broken places. My own broken heart is mending, and largely thanks to so many of you, my dear parishioners. For if in the last week I have relearned one lesson, it is that love only begets love. It not only begets love, it transmits strength. I mean, just, you know, in the preaching world, we say, step aside and let the big dog eat. You know, I mean, this is just phenomenal use of language. I mean, you cannot top that. I mean, he worked hard at crafting that, and it shows. It shows.
And it's another example of how his loving the good is greater than hating the evil.
Right.
Bingo. Bingo.
Which is one of the things we thought of when you talked about him and Jerry Falwell, is what a contrast there as well.
Yes.
Someone
Let me
loving
read
the
it.
good and someone else hating the evil.
That's right.
I think you'll like this. Let me read this next piece about the theological conundrum of his son's death. For some reason, nothing so infuriates me as the incapacity of seemingly intelligent people to get it through their heads that God does not go around this world with his fingers on triggers, his fist around knives, his hands on steering wheels. God is dead set against all unnatural deaths. And Christ spent an inordinate amount of time delivering people from paralysis, insanity, leprosy, and muteness, which is not to say that there are no nature-caused deaths. I can think of many right here in this parish in the 5 years I've been here, deaths that are untimely and slow and pain-ridden, which for that reason raise unanswerable questions, and even the specter of a cosmic sadist, yes, even an eternal vivisector. But violent deaths, such as the one Alex died, to understand those is a piece of cake. As his younger brother put it simply, standing at the head of the casket at the Boston funeral, you blew it, buddy, you blew it. The one thing that should never be said when someone dies is, it is the will of God. Never do we know enough to say that. My own consolation lies in knowing that it was not the will of God that Alex die, that when the waves closed over the sinking car, God's heart was the first of all of our hearts to break.
Amen. That's powerful.
Ow.
That's powerful. Yep.
Bob, I'm interested in you talked about parallelism. What do you mean by that? I mean, it was a.
Well, the parallelism, it's a rhetorical use, you know, this versus this and this, or the inversion of words. For example, the world is too dangerous for anything but truth and too small for anything but love. It's just beautiful. Wow. A spiritual person tries less to be godly than to be deeply human. So, by the way, these are the uses of chiasm. This is a biblical rhetorical strategy where you can chart a thought in a psalm. That'll be the first thought will be A and the second thought will be B. The third thought will be a recapitulation of B, and then the fourth one will be A again. This is poetic, obviously, but it's not just rhyming or anything like that. It's more about the theological content. Truth is always in danger of being sacrificed on the altars of good taste and social stability. That's not so much parallelism, but just witty use of poetry.
Who
I
said
love what he
that?
s-
May I ask? Excuse me for
That's
jumping
Coffin.
in, but that he
Truth-
said that also.
Say that again.
Well, I was asking who said that. Was
That's
that what
Coffin.
Coffin said?
These are all Coffins. These are
Yes.
all him.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
That's all right. He said, I like what he said about Thomas Harris's book. Remember, I'm okay, you're okay?
Oh, yeah.
He says, I'm not okay. This is Coffin. I'm not okay, and you're not okay,
Okay.
and that's okay.
There you go. And I think there again, I have to jump in for a minute because you're really talking about kind of two different ideas, and all this stuff is, different theologians or different philosophers or whatever ideas that bump up together, and you go, and even the truth kind of just is the result of those
Yeah.
over and over and over again.
I like what he says about this, about the Bible. It's a mistake to look to the Bible to close a discussion. The Bible seeks to open one.
Amen.
Well,
That's a
amen to
parallelism.
that. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
and there's room for that. What you said about Falwell and him talking together, and I think again, you hear, the echoes of the after effect of what both of them said. It's just it's truth. We continue to debate all that.
Exactly. Here's one more. Diversity may be the hardest thing for a society to live with, and perhaps the most dangerous thing for a society to be without.